In this lecture on OT Canon, within the OT hermeneutics, we start by asking ourselves, how were the scriptures formed? How were the scriptures formed? At least Christians are agreed that the Bible did not fall down from heaven, nor was it dictated to human beings by a terrestrial being as one unitary source, as it is claimed of other religious books such as Quran. On the contrary, it is believed that the Bible or the Bible books were formed from earlier sources. The Bible was written by various people, over 40 people, who were inspired of God, and both conservative and critical readers of the Bible attest to this significant detail. Now, the objective of this lesson as part of OT hermeneutics is to acquaint you, the learner, with the intricate detail of the formation of the OT canon. Therefore, you are expected, or you should be able, at the very end, to explain factors that led to the formation of the OT canon and the criteria that were used to arrive at the canon, particularly the Protestant canon as it is today. Now, we may ask, what is canon? The word canon has its root in the Greek word canon, which means a reed or a straight rod or a measuring stick. It later came to stand for a standard measure. When used in relation to the Bible, it is meant to distinguish what is revealed and divine from what is not revealed and thus human. Canonicity precedes all other studies in biblical studies. Thus, it precedes hermeneutics. This is a historical study of the process of the determination of the books of the Bible that bears the stamp of divine inspiration. By and large, hermeneutics is necessary primarily for books that are inspired. Coming strictly now to OT canon, we must appreciate that critical scholars, noting that ancient literature developed from oral accounts or from combination of a number of sources, they will ask whether that may not be the case with the literature contained in the Bible. Now, when discrepancies are noted, scholars wonder whether they exist because of differing or conflicting sources which have been combined in our biblical books. For example, when accounts in the Torah differ, or the law books, the first five books in the OT, the Torah, when they differ, the accounts differ, could it be that further theological reflection by the community has found a way to phrase an account which allows the point to be made in such a way that irrelevant questions are avoided? What qualifies a book for a place in the canon of the OT is not just that It is ancient, informative, and helpful, and has existed for long among God's people, but that it has God's authority. One scholar by name Akitema, in his publication 1983, observes further that, for example, when Genesis 17:25 attests that Ishmael was 13 years when Isaac was born, but Genesis 21:14-15 assumes that Ishmael was a babe in Hagar's arms when she was driven into the wilderness. The occurrence could be a clear indicator that this narrative has been recast from various traditions that independently existed of one another. This stands to show that discrepancies in the text are possibly due to combination of various sources which had further theological developments. It shows that our Bible is composed of varieties of traditions which have received differing formulations and interpretations. Therefore, the point of the Bible could be both historical and also theological. Historical accounts are reserved for the theological points that they help make. This is true of the accounts in patriarchal accounts in Genesis and the rest of the OT. Therefore, in biblical interpretations, we see both conservative and critical scholars making the construct that best fits them. Conservatives become more hypothetically apologetic, while critical scholars prefer the other extreme position. Most importantly, we note that both scholars impose theories of whatever nature to the text, either to resolve the discrepancy or to reveal its weakness. For all, we need to note that Scripture reflects the dynamic process at work in the community of Israel, the church, and those who stood within these communities and sought to understand the significance of their God-related, directed history. The Scripture, based on other area material, is attested to by the Bible itself. For example, some material in First and Second Kings was drawn from the annals of the king of Israel, and what was taken was sourced from a section of that literature. What we need to note is that in some cases, some books are rewritten accounts of other books just to make a new point. The books of Chronicles are written accounts of 1st and 2nd Kings, done to show the importance of the Jerusalem temple and claim the priority of Judah over Israel in all religious matters. Now, biblical authors are not imprisoned by their traditions. Rather, they use old material in new ways. For example, the tradition of the blessing of Abraham is reused in that we see in Genesis 12 and 17 is reused in Ezekiel 33, 23-20, and in Isaiah 51, 1-3 for diametrically opposed reasons. The point being shown here is that all our biblical texts are largely products of interpretation of the will of God as illuminated in time by other traditions. Secondly, is that Scripture has been produced out of the experience of a community as it sought to come to terms with a God whose nature is beyond that of human beings. Scripture did not drop as a stone from heaven. It grew out of the life of a community chosen by God. Christian faith is not a response to a holy book. On the contrary, church and scripture grew alongside each other, both shaping each other. Coming to the canon now, to speak of the canon of the scripture is to use the word in a different sense from that of rule or standard. The canon of scripture is originally the list of books recognized by the church as her sacred scriptures. The first use of this word in this sense is attributed to the early church father Athanasius in his 39th letter. The canon therefore encompasses those books which were selected and recognized as authoritative for faith. We call these books canonical books. At this early juncture, it is critical to appreciate that the Protestant canon differs from the Roman Catholic canon, difference of which can be explained by a further study of the history of the Reformation of the 16th century. It has been noted that one major agreement between Jesus and the scribes of his day was on the Old Testament canon, though they differed on interpretation or the hermeneutics. They agreed on the corpus of the law, the prophets, and the writings. Concerning the Old Testament canon, canonical issues regarding the Old Testament are not so opposed, mainly because it receives accent from Christ himself. It was the Bible of his education and the Bible of his ministry. He took for granted its doctrine and teachings. He used it to justify his mission, and even his death. He fed his own soul with its content. Therefore, what was indispensable to the Redeemer must be indispensable to the redeemed. The earliest Christian list of OT books, compiled by Mileto, Bishop of Sardis, comprised all books except Esther, which was included later. Basically, the OT canon had no major issues as it developed. The Council of Trent recognized the disputed books as deuterocanonical and others as proto-canonical. Thank you.